Hello and welcome. I first and foremost want to say thank you for joining me and a very, very, very happy new year to everyone out there. Hope that you guys are all in good health and you didn't have too much to drink and are hungover right now. Um, there's a couple of topics that I want to talk about with you first to kick off this new year without going too in depth and a lot of wonky political stuff in detail. What I wanted to address is first off, I do want to complete that second half of my talk to Bernie supporters. I was going in on a point talking about a comparison between Sanders with Obama, and for some of those who viewed that video, I want to be able to wrap that up and so you guys know where I was going with that point. So it doesn't feel like I was just trying to get away from it or I didn't know where I was going with that thought. What happened was I actually backed myself up too much in some of my recordings and had a problem with storage, and you know how it is to try to purge through getting rid of videos and clearing everything. So had to handle those problems first before I could get up and running with more videos for you. So my apologies there. Uh, uh, but first, before I get into the Bernie conversation, the wrap up and the part two to the Bernie conversation, uh, I wanted to start out anew with a refreshed and a more positive approach towards having conversations with people we don't necessarily line up with all the way. And I call this segment Bubbles about, and I want to talk about our different bubbles and different ways we should try to address others in different bubbles. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you guys for being here with me. And let's start the show. All right. Thank you for joining me. As you all know, my name is Marcus Cage. I'm your host, and this is what I've been thinking. In a show where I like to go over some of the current events and topics that are going on, and kind of give you guys my take. I'm just an average Joe, working a 9 to 5, just like the rest of you guys out there. But for some weird reason, I like to spend a lot of my time studying politics, statistics, following these issues, so that I can try to digest this down and give you guys quick bits of information, which I feel like you guys should probably listen to or focus on or might want to be aware of, or things that I feel like might be a fun or entertaining conversation. Um, I do plan to do a lot more videos and drop a lot more frequently in this new year. So that's something that I want you guys to all look forward to. But without further ado, let's get into the subject that I wanted to talk about first and foremost here today, and it's I call it bubbles, and we're all in different bubbles from some degree to another. Whether you grew up in a different socioeconomic status than another person, whether you live in just a certain region, which is different than others, all those things shape the different bubbles that we're in. All the different experiences that we've experienced throughout our lifetimes all shape the bubble that we're in. The experience that happened through our family, our loved ones, through our friends, our coworkers, our colleagues, through the information sources which we receive, whether it's uh, actual print media, whether it's news, whether it's certain people, whether it's a religious organization, whether you may go to a church, a synagogue, may have other religious leanings, or maybe non-religious, but you have some kind of other organizational group or function which you're involved in, a subgroup, if you may say. All of these different things all shape our different bubbles. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's nothing that should be looked at in a negative light at all, because we all have them. What I want to talk about, though, is noticing your own bubble and trying to challenge yourself and say, I know where I sit. I understand the different things which have shaped my viewpoint. But what I want to do is I want to push past that. And I want to talk to those people who I know I don't agree with, who are in different bubbles. And instead of demonizing some of these people, which is very easy to do, instead of assuming that these people know this information and they just have ill will, to try to have a conversation and try to peel back the layers of the onion so that you can get a better understanding of the different people around you that you're talking with. You never know what their background and experiences are that dictated them to that point of view. For instance, people who grew up through different eras, the amount of information that we're able to research in today's day, it's easy for me as a borderline millennial Gen Xer to criticize earlier generations and okay boomer for a lot of them not stepping up and fighting against a lot of the problems that we face today through different leaders, whether they supported them or didn't push back or didn't notice the trends that were going on that were getting worse and worse and worse. Our media has been so trusted for so long, for so many years, because for a good chunk of time, they were, to a degree, somewhat on the up and up. They would challenge. And maybe if this organization didn't, there was another organization that was always challenging. And so it would put pressure for even those ones who kind of coddled those people who were corrupt or did unsavory or unethical things. There was always pushback, and there was always ways to rein this in. Now, that doesn't exist as much in the media. The media basically picks which side of the aisle that they want to be on, which side of the issue that they want to be on. And it's all filtered through which donors, not donors, but which sponsors, which they have, which are funding through the commercials. If you notice a lot of the media now, which you see as far as cable news, a lot of it is a lot of panels fighting back and forth, scorecards, basically trying to take the same model, which you see in an ESPN or a sports broadcast. And the reason why is it's a lot easier to push us into our bubbles and into our corners, make us pick and choose one issue or the other, and then just fight it out. And what I want all of us out there to do is to just take the time to have these conversations, because you never know, that person who you consider this evil neoliberal, what if they grew up in an area where they grew up upper middle class, where maybe their community didn't have the problems and they don't see the problems that we see. So to them, we may sound radical and crazy because they're not seeing the same issues that we see on a regular basis. Or if they're seeing them, they're not to the degree. And so you have to always factor some of those things in. Another thing is a lot of people, most people in general, I feel, are more swayed by stories which are more personal experience. If they know one person who had a bad experience at this restaurant or this store, that can sway their decision to never do business or interact with that company or organization ever again. It's the same thing when you trust in people that same way. If you trust in that person so vehemently, it's easy to not want to hear other information, especially when it's coming from outside of your bubble. Case in point, when Barack Obama got elected, a lot of the criticism which came to him, I felt came from uh, it came from a bad place, because whether the criticisms were legitimate, and in some cases they were very, very legitimate, the people who were pushing them had ulterior motives and were coming from a place of underhandedness. And so instead of being able to influence or have a conversation with somebody like me who's able to be objective and say, I support this person, but I'm able to call out flaws when I feel that they make mistakes or things which I disagree with or that I feel is a mistake. They could be correct, but if I have a viewpoint and I feel that the criticism is legitimate, then I'm going to go at it from that lens. But if I feel the criticism is partisan, or if it's some kind of race tinge or sexism or any kind of motive that's not what's being stated, it's always going to give you wariness and cause, I feel. I know myself in particular. And so when a lot of those on the right who might have had criticism of Obama, which were very fair, because there were so many people which were coming from a racist standpoint or coming from an extreme partisan nature, where it was, I don't care, they're blue, we're not going to do anything with them, we're not going to help them, we're going to completely stop and obstruct everything that comes through his administration. When you're coming from that standpoint and it's, I'm going to just be against you no matter what, whenever you start to criticize, then it makes your criticism harder to accept because you're not being a fair actor. And part of these bubbles that we're in, it's easy for us to see the mistakes on the other side. And it's a lot harder for us to do self-reflection and look at the mistakes that might be in our own camp. When I played sports growing up, if I did something on the field that was, say a penalty, and I got away with it, and a teammate saw it, that's on the sports field. Of course, most people are going to take that advantage. But what we have to do is we have to realize that politics is not a sports game. This is not a game. This is people's lives which are being affected. And we have to think about it that way. When the establishment of the left and the right are sitting at the top and they're basically playing back and forth chess moves, we're the pawns. You know, when you think of shows like Game of Thrones, which is one of my favorite shows, and we're thinking about some of the top characters, you know, the Starks or the Lannisters, and we're watching this power dynamic go on. Well, in that power dynamic, most of us are the people in King's Landing. Most of us have no power, and we're stuck being dictated whatever comes from the top. We have to remember that hey, that's a bubble that they don't see, which is a different bubble. I understand that it's a lot harder to break through to some of those people in those bubbles to get across what we're seeing and what we're feeling. But I ask for you to try to have that restraint and I guess self-discipline to be able to have those conversations and try to just, you know, peck at them just a little bit, little facts, but just try to keep it respectful. I understand that some of the people who are out there, it's virtually impossible. The media has completely conditioned the way they think and the way they see everything. And whatever MSNBC says, they're going to parrot it 100%. Whatever CNN says, whatever Fox News, whatever CNBC, whichever outlet that you want to go for. Because for the most part, a good portion of most of the base are stuck in a big chunk of one bubble or another bubble. And those bubbles are what the powers that be, the establishment, prefer for us to be in. Because we're more manageable if we're in bubbles. Because then we can say, hey, support this person or else. But if we're all together and we're all trying to figure out what are the most important issues that cross all the bubbles, then we can actually get somewhere. So this is the second half of my Bernie conversation, which I wanted to have. In the first part of the conversation, where I left off, I was talking about President Obama, how once he got into power, he started to capitulate on many things, and he started to let us down and fail us in many ways there. I'm not trying to say that Bernie Sanders would do or be akin to what Barack Obama did. But what I'm trying to express is even if Bernie Sanders doesn't capitulate, there are going to be members in the House, in the Senate, which he's going to have to constantly fight against himself. So, though it's not Bernie Sanders who is capitulating, we do got to realize that there are people who are going to be capitulating, and it's going to be up to us to continue to put that pressure on them. It's up to us to continue to apply this pressure. For those of you who say, "Oh, well, once Bernie gets elected, well, he'll do this and he'll do that and he'll do this and he'll do that." Well, I've been a Bernie supporter. I want to say honestly, since about first time I heard of Bernie Sanders was probably about 1998, 99. So I want to say probably around 2003, 2004 was when I really was knowledgeable about Bernie Sanders, and probably about 2006, 2007 when I used to watch or listen to Tom Hartman podcast. Well, not podcast. It wasn't a podcast at that time. It was radio show, AM radio. But he used to come on regularly on the Tom Hartman show, just like Ro Khanna does now, just like, gosh, I'm having a hard time remembering his name. I apologize. But Congressman Mark Pocan, just like they do now. Bernie would come on, I believe it was on Fridays, and he would come on almost every Friday, and he would talk about the different issues which he was trying to accomplish. The biggest thing that I noticed in all of those conversations was the amount of obstruction which he constantly faced. When people give this criticism of, well, Bernie's been in power at all this time and he hasn't gotten anything done. For one, that's extremely misleading at best. For two, it's a complete falsehood. The reason why I say that is because you have 100 members of the Senate. No one person in the Senate just gets everything done. If that was the case, they would just automatically make that person president, or the party's nominee. But there is no senator who has this long, lengthy record of just knocking it out of the park on major issue after major issue after major issue. It's a little issue here, an issue there. It's an amendment that you put in. It's an amendment that you took away. It's a vote that you were there for where you said no. It's a totality of issues. It's not about just looking at one major piece of legislation that was accomplished. If you look at it in that light, that's almost like it's related to, for me, it's easier to relate it to sports. One of my favorite NFL quarterbacks of all time was Dan Marino. One of the knocks on Dan Marino is that Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. And that's something that people always hit him by. Was he really that great because he never won a Super Bowl? Well, I look at passing major legislation is like winning Super Bowls. Now, you can get maybe 1, 2, 3, but you're not going to find senators who have 10, 12, 30 major legislation which are passed. It doesn't exist. So when they're coming at him from this point, know that it's not a legitimate attack. It's something that's meant to smear. It's something that's meant to mislead. Because if you think about it, this question is not asked of anybody else. That said, the fact that accomplishing one of these major issues like Medicare for all, or like student loan debt, any of these major issues that Bernie is pushing for is going to be a major push. And it's going to be almost the equivalent of trying to win a Super Bowl. That's how you have to look at it. You can't just look at it as Bernie's going to be in there. It's going to be good. Um, last thing I want to finish up with is Bernie supporters. We do love our candidate, and there's nothing wrong with being passionate about your candidate. But we have to make an effort to criticize in a way which stays policy based and which doesn't come across as nasty, as childish, as petty, because we got to remember, Bernie's always been held to a different standard, and so are his supporters. When one of us does something, all of us get the whole blame for it, even though he literally has millions of supporters. I don't even know how that's not a pushback for most people. You have millions of supporters and you expect for every single one to be a perfect little angel. That doesn't jog with reality. But a lot of people don't really push back on that silly framing of the argument, because I have literally faced horrible Hillary Clinton supporters, horrible Kamala Harris supporters, horrible Pete Buttigieg supporters, horrible Warren supporters. I have to say I haven't really faced too many of the Beto O'Rourke's who are negative, and some of those other ones, Tulsi Gabbard, Yang. All the major candidates, as you start to build up your numbers and your name ID, and you start to track a coalition of people from all different walks of life, you're going to have people who are nice, prim, and proper. You're going to have people who are maybe a little rough and brash. You're going to have people who are not the most politically correct. You're going to have people who are complete jerks, who are rude. You're going to have all those people. Just because you have all those people, that does not mean that that's the candidate or that's a reflection of the candidate. So, that said, I just want or I guess I don't want to say want like I'm trying to demand or trying to make myself some kind of authority on other Bernie supporters. My request, I'll ask, is that we try to figure out what makes some of these other supporters tick, and if we can have better conversations to explain why we feel the way we do, maybe that can soften some of these people's feelings towards our candidate. That's all I have for you. Hope you guys enjoyed. Happy New Year again. And I'll catch you on the next video. Like, share, comment, any kind of feedback that you guys want to give me, or any kind of stories that you want to hear more about, please let me know. Oh yeah, I forgot one other thing. I have started a second Twitter profile that's going to be just for polling. That one, I want to try to limit myself as much on my commentary, because I'm trying my best to get as much of a wide opinion spray of the different political electors, of people who will potentially vote in the Democratic primary. Not as much concerned with anybody who is definitely for Trump and not going to vote against him. Except for some of the polls I will have, they will be general election polls, head-to-head versus Trump and whoever the nominee becomes. So at that point, yes, if you're a Trump supporter out there listening to this, yes, I do want to hear your voice. I want to hear your thoughts on the poll. I'll try my best not to push back in a negative way, and we'll try our best to have a cordial discussion. As I start getting those polls rolling, I will try to do quick snapshot videos of those, also to give you guys what's been going on and what the fallout and what the perception, at least from the Twitter world, is on the poll front. And on that one, I will be starting a separate channel that will just have that on there. So for those of you who love my commentary and want to hear different thoughts about whatever, yes, stay here. But for those of you who also want to hear just the polling and get a snapshot into what people who aren't on the left, or people who don't share some of the viewpoints that we have, what they're thinking, then I will link that once I get everything set up, and as I start to get videos rolling there, I will always plug it on this channel also so that you guys will be able to follow if you're interested. That's all I have. I wish you guys the best, and have a great new year.